It was a GE Model 29871, the kind with the micro-cassette tape, the kind that sat on kitchen counters and hallway tables across America from the mid-1980s through the mid-1990s and blinked a red number at you when you came home. This particular machine had belonged to a woman named Carol Price. It had been in the evidence room of the Cattaraugus County Sheriff's Department in Olean, New York, since October 1996, when it was collected from Carol's kitchen counter the day after she disappeared. It had been logged, bagged, and shelved. It had sat in that evidence room through 7 sheriffs, 2 building renovations, a flood that damaged the lower shelves in 2011, and 27 years of a case that had never been officially closed and never, in any meaningful way, been moved forward. In the spring of 2023, a newly assigned cold case detective named Sergeant Dana Kowalski pulled the Price box from the shelf as part of a routine evidence audit. She plugged in the answering machine to verify it was functional before transferring its contents to digital archive. The tape inside had 4 messages on it. 3 were from Carol's sister, 2 days before Carol vanished. 1 was from the night Carol disappeared, time-stamped 9:14 p.m. on October 8, 1996. It had never been played. It had never been logged. It had been sitting in that machine, on that tape, in that evidence room, for 27 years. Sergeant Kowalski pressed play. What she heard changed everything. But to understand what that voice said, and why it mattered after 27 years, and how it led to the arrest of a man whose name had been in the files since the beginning, you have to go back to Olean in the fall of 1996. Because Carol Price was not just a missing woman. She was a second-grade teacher and a single mother, and a person so woven into the fabric of that community that when she disappeared, the whole town felt it. And when the case went cold, the whole town quietly stopped talking about it in the way that people stopped talking about the things that hurt most. Olean sits in the southern tier of New York State, in the hill country near the Pennsylvania border, where the Allegheny River makes its curve south, and the old oil refineries that built the city in the 19th century have given way to manufacturing and healthcare and the particular steady-state economy of small cities that have found their equilibrium after the big industry left. It is a city of approximately 14,000 people, with a Catholic college on the hill and a main street that still has a hardware store and a diner and a barber shop within a single block of each other. In the mid-1990s, it was the kind of place where people left their cars unlocked in winter, so nobody would be stranded, and where the school district was small enough that a second-grade teacher was likely to have taught the children of people she had grown up beside. Carol Price had grown up in Olean, gone to college in Buffalo, and come back at 26 because her mother was ill. And because she had told her sister Ruth she had never found anywhere that felt more like home. She had accepted a second-grade position at Lincoln Elementary in 1988. She had been there 8 years when she disappeared. She had a daughter named Abby, who was 9 years old in October 1996, and who was at her grandmother's house, Carol's mother's, on the night her mother vanished. Carol was 34 years old. She had brown hair she kept cut short and a habit of staying late at school on Tuesdays and Thursdays to prepare her classroom for the following week. A ritual her colleagues knew so well that the custodian left her key on the windowsill so she could lock up herself. She drove a 1993 Honda Civic in a blue-green color that her students called her teal car, and that she had once told her sister was the best decision she had ever made. In a list of decisions that also included leaving her marriage, coming back to Olean, and buying the small house on Maple Avenue, with the deep porch and the apple tree in the backyard. She was also, in the fall of 1996, 6 months into a relationship with a man named Glenn Tarver, who worked as a contractor and had grown up 2 towns over in Portville. He was 38 years old, recently divorced. Known in the community as someone you called when you needed a deck built or a kitchen remodeled. Steady, competent, unremarkable. He had coached youth baseball for 2 seasons. His ex-wife had moved to Rochester. His adult daughter from a previous relationship lived in Olean and spoke well of him. Carol's colleagues at Lincoln Elementary liked him well enough when he came to school events. Her sister Ruth had reservations she had difficulty articulating. Her mother had met him 3 times. On October 7th, 1996, Carol Price left Lincoln Elementary at approximately 7 o'clock p.m. after her Tuesday preparation session. She drove home to Maple Avenue. She was seen by her neighbor, Frank Ludlow, pulling into her driveway at 7:20 p.m. He waved. She waved back. He went inside. That was the last time anyone saw Carol Price. Ruth Price called Carol's phone at 8 o'clock p.m. on October 7th. No answer. She called again at 9 o'clock p.m. No answer. At 10 o'clock p.m., she drove to Maple Avenue and found Carol's teal Civic in the driveway, the front door unlocked, Carol's school bag on the kitchen table, Carol's coat on the hook, a mug of tea half made on the counter, the kettle still warm. She was not there. Ruth called the Cattaraugus County Sheriff's Department at 10:17 p.m. A deputy arrived at 10:44 p.m. He documented the scene. He noted the car in the driveway, the unlocked door, the tea. He noted the answering machine on the kitchen counter, its red light blinking, indicating messages. And he logged it as evidence along with the rest of the contents of the kitchen. The machine was bagged and taken to the evidence room. Nobody pressed play that night. The deputy had assumed, as deputies sometimes do with answering machines, in a scene with no immediately obvious crime, that the messages were old, that they could be reviewed later, that there were more urgent things to document first. Later became 27 years. By 8 a.m. on October 8th, the search had begun. 30 volunteers walked the Allegheny River path and the fields south of Maple Avenue. The state police were notified by noon. By 3 p.m., the search had expanded to a 5-mile radius. By evening, it had produced nothing. Carol Price's teal Civic remained in her driveway. Her school bag remained on her kitchen table. Her second-grade class went to school the following morning and was told by the principal that Mrs. Price was not feeling well. 14 children waited all day for her to come back. What investigators had in those first 72 hours? A warm kettle, an unlocked door, a car that had not moved, a half-made mug of tea, and a neighbor who had waved at her from 20 feet away and seen nothing unusual. What they did not yet know they had: a micro-cassette tape in a GE answering machine sitting in an evidence bag with 4 messages on it, one of which had been left at 9:14 p.m. on the night Carol disappeared, and which had not been there when Ruth called at 8 and 9 p.m., which meant it had been left in the window between 9 p.m. and the moment Carol was no longer in her house to answer it. That window was somewhere between 15 and 77 minutes long. What happened inside it was the whole story. The lead investigator on the Carol Price case was a Cattaraugus County detective named Lou Ferraro, who was 42 years old in October 1996 and who had worked the Southern Tier for 18 years. He was a deliberate, thorough man who drove a truck and kept his notes in spiral notebooks, and was known in the department for the particular quality of never letting go of a thread until he had followed it somewhere, even somewhere that turned out to be wrong. Ferraro focused on Glenn Tarver immediately. Not from evidence, from instinct, from the shape of things, from the fact that Tarver's account of the night of October 7th had a gap in it that he couldn't fill with anything verifiable. Tarver said he had been home alone that evening, had spoken to Carol briefly by phone around 7:30 p.m., and had gone to bed early. No witness confirmed it. No record supported it. It was a man alone in a house with no one to account for his time. But there was nothing to charge him with. There was no body. There was no physical evidence placing Tarver at Carol's house that night. There were no witnesses other than Frank Ludlow, who had seen Carol arrive and nothing else. There was a gut feeling in a spiral notebook, and that was not enough. Ferraro also investigated a former colleague of Carol's named Dennis Ashby, who had left Lincoln Elementary under uncomfortable circumstances in 1994, and who had sent Carol what her sister described as unwanted letters in 1995. Ashby was interviewed twice. He had been in Niagara Falls visiting his parents on October 7th, confirmed by 2 witnesses and a motel receipt. He was eliminated cleanly. The institutional failure that would define the next 27 years was not dramatic. It was quiet and ordinary, and the kind of thing that happens in departments with limited resources and no dedicated cold case unit. The answering machine was logged, shelved, and never reviewed. The deputy who collected it had noted it as electronic device, answering machine, messages unknown, and moved on to other things. Ferraro, who took over the case 3 days later, noted the machine in the evidence log, but had been told by a colleague that it had already been reviewed and contained only old messages from Carol's sister. That information was wrong. It had never been reviewed at all. The miscommunication sat in the file for 27 years, like a closed door that nobody tried to open again. By 1998, 2 years after Carol disappeared, Ferraro had hit every wall he could find. Tarver had been interviewed 4 times. He had retained a lawyer after the 3rd interview and answered questions through counsel after that. He had not moved away. He had continued working in Olean. He had, by outward appearance, continued his life with the kind of steadiness that either signals innocence or its opposite. Carol's daughter Abby had been raised by Carol's mother Eleanor, who died in 2007. By then Abby was 20 years old, living in Buffalo, studying nursing. She called Ruth every Sunday. She had not been back to Maple Avenue since the week her mother disappeared. By 2005, Lou Ferraro had retired. He left the price file with a note in the front. Tarver, keep looking. He died in 2014. He did not live to see what his instinct had always pointed toward. The apple tree in Carol's backyard had been taken down by the new owners of the house in 2003. The house had been repainted twice. The teal Civic had been sold at auction in 2001. Glenn Tarver had remarried in 2004, built a house on the south end of town, and become the kind of person that a community treats as settled and permanent. A fixture, a neighbor. Someone you didn't particularly think about. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserved better. If you believe that kind of work matters, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to Carol. The cold case had been sitting for 27 years when Sergeant Dana Kowalski plugged in the GE answering machine on a Tuesday afternoon in April 2023. The machine ran on a standard 9-volt adapter. Kowalski had found the adapter coiled in the evidence bag alongside the machine, still attached. She plugged it into the outlet at her desk. The power indicator lit. The tape counter read 4. She pressed play. The first 3 messages were Ruth's voice. October 5th and 6th, 1996. Routine calls, the sound of a sister checking in. Kowalski let them run. The 4th message began at the timestamp 9:14 p.m., October 7th, 1996. It was a man's voice. He spoke for 41 seconds. He said Carol's name twice. He said he needed to talk to her. He said he had been thinking about what had happened between them and he needed her to understand something. His voice was controlled but not calm. The particular register of a person keeping the surface steady while something harder moves beneath it. He left his name at the end, clearly, the way people left names on answering machines in 1996 because it was expected. His name was Glenn Tarver. Kowalski stopped the tape. She sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called her supervisor and said, "I need you to come hear this." The message established 3 things that had not been established in 27 years of investigation. First, that Tarver had called Carol at 9:14 p.m. on the night she disappeared, which meant his statement that he had spoken to her at 7:30 p.m. and gone to bed early was false. Second, that she had not answered that call, which meant she was already not in the house at 9:14 p.m., almost certainly already gone. Third, that the call had not been accounted for in any of Tarver's 4 interviews, in any phone record review, in any part of the investigation, because the tape had never been played and the call had been made from a payphone on Route 417, which the phone record search in 1996 would not have connected to Tarver without a specific reason to look for it. The payphone record still existed in archived telephone company documents. It was retrieved in 48 hours. Tarver's fingerprints were still in the system from a 1991 contractor licensing application. A warrant for a DNA sample was obtained on May 14, 2023. A DNA match to material recovered from Carol's kitchen counter, a partial print on the kettle, lifted and preserved in 1996 and never matched, was confirmed by the State Forensic Lab on June 2, 2023. He had touched her kettle. He had been in that kitchen. He had been there on October 7, 1996, and he had called her at 9:14 p.m. from a payphone a quarter-mile away, and left his name on her tape and then driven back to his house and told investigators 4 times over 4 interviews that he had not been to Carol's house that evening. The arrest warrant was signed on June 17, 2023. Glenn Tarver was 65 years old when 2 Cattaraugus County Sheriff's deputies and Sergeant Dana Kowalski arrived at his house on the south end of Olean at 7:30 a.m. on June 18, 2023. He was in his kitchen. He answered the door in work clothes. He still did contracting work, still built decks and remodeled kitchens, still had the business cards and the reputation and the phone that rang with jobs. He saw Kowalski and the 2 deputies on his porch, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before he said anything. He said, "I figured this day would come eventually." He was handcuffed and walked to the patrol car in clear view of the houses on his street, 2 of which had neighbors who came to their windows. By noon, the arrest had been confirmed in a department press release. By evening, it had been reported in the Olean Times-Herald. By the following morning, it had reached people who had grown up in Olean, who had gone to Lincoln Elementary, who had been in Carol Price's 2nd grade class 27 years earlier, and who were now adults in their mid-30s, learning that the man who had built half the decks in the south end of their city had been responsible for their teacher not coming back. The community did not absorb this quietly. Tarver was charged with 2nd-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty. His trial was set for the spring of 2024. In February of 2024, during pretrial proceedings, his attorney filed to suppress the voicemail on chain of custody grounds, arguing that 27 years in an evidence room without being reviewed constituted improper handling. The motion was denied. The judge ruled that the evidence had been continuously logged, continuously maintained, and that the failure to review it was procedural negligence, not evidence tampering. The tape was admissible. He changed his plea to guilty in March 2024. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in May 2024. Carol Price's body has not been found. Tarver gave investigators a statement in the months before his sentencing that described what had happened on the night of October 7th, 1996. A confrontation at the house, an argument that escalated, a choice he made. He described where he had taken her. Investigators searched the location he described in a wooded area off a county road in Allegheny County, adjacent to a property he had done work on in 1996. They found what they were looking for in August 2024. Carol Price was laid to rest in Olean in September 2024. Her daughter Abby, 37 years old, attended the service with her husband and her 2 children. Carol's grandchildren, who Carol never knew, who have Carol's brown hair and who will grow up knowing her name. Ruth Price was 62 years old when Sergeant Kowalski called her on a Tuesday evening in April 2023 to tell her that a voicemail had been found on a tape that had been sitting in evidence for 27 years. Ruth said only, "She called him something, didn't she?" She meant Glenn Tarver. It was not a question. Abby Price has said in a published interview that she does not know how to feel about the 27 years. She said she knows her mother would have wanted her to spend her energy on her children, not on the years that were lost. She said she tries. She said it's not always possible to try as hard as she would like. Sergeant Donna Kowalski has said she thinks about the evidence audit often, about what would have happened if the machine had been on a lower shelf in 2011, when the flood damaged the lower storage. About how many other evidence rooms in how many other departments contain objects that have been logged but never examined, voices that have been preserved but never heard. She does not have an answer to this question. She has said she thinks about it anyway. Lou Ferraro's note, Tarver, "Keep looking," is in the case file. It was there when Kowalski pulled the box. She read it before she plugged in the machine. She has said she read it after too, standing in the evidence room after the tape had played, and that she thought, he was right for 27 years and never got to know it. There is a specific kind of grief in a case like this one. Not the grief of a family, which is its own complete thing, but the grief of the investigators who spent careers on the right answer and never arrived. Lou Ferraro spent 18 years on this case and retired still holding it. He was right. He was right from the first week in a spiral notebook with nothing he could prove. The tape proved it for him 9 years after he died. The GE answering machine is back in the evidence archive. It will stay there through trial and appeal and however long the process runs. It is a beige plastic box that blinks a red number. It held a dead woman's voice for 27 years and a living man's guilt on the same tape. 4 messages apart, waiting for someone to press play. Justice found Carol Price after 27 years. It found her because a detective opened a box on a Tuesday afternoon and did the thing that everyone before her had assumed had already been done. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved stories are in the description below. Thank you for watching.